Sarah Longwell is a Republican strategist, and she's joining us from Washington. Welcome back to this program, Sarah Longwell. You've just heard me talk to the presidential advisor in a real matter of life and death, not just for Ukraine, but for the Western world. How do you explain that a third of the House Republicans voted against a resolution supporting NATO?
Oh, it's quite simple. It's about Donald Trump and his capture on the Republican Party, the way that he has changed and shaped the Republican Party since he won the election in 2016. Abandoning NATO has always been central to who Donald Trump is. He called it fat and obsolete and sloppy. He was always against it. And I think that, there's a lot of us, and I'll put myself in this category, who thought that Trump was a cancer on the Republican Party and that if you sort of cut him out, there would be this institutional muscle memory that would bounce back and there would be enough of the old Republican Party there to sort of, just come back to normal. And instead what you've seen is he's metastasized as a cancer, and the party has gotten Trumpier in its entire posture. And so seeing 63 Republicans vote against just affirming NATO that's all it is. It's all about the party getting Trumpier and being created more in Donald Trump's image.
Does that mean, though, I hear everything you're saying, does that mean then the Republican Party, or at least a big chunk of it, is abandoning what used to be its North Star, one of them anyway, on international affairs, to be strong on defense, strong on security?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real division in the Republican Party. And I'll tell you, the Republican Party that I joined was one that believed as a central fundamental tenet in American leadership in the world. And, there was always a little bit of a recessive isolationist gene within the party, but that is now the dominant gene. And it's to the point where, and you see the Tucker Carlsons of the world out there actively posturing against Ukraine. The Senate endorsed candidate in Ohio by Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, he talked about, why do we care about Ukraine? There's this isolationist movement, and there's still a chunk of the party, that establishment, the old guard, who, just still has that muscle memory. But the people taking over and the candidates that are running in 2022 reflect much more this Donald Trump isolationist vision that is anti-NATO. And if it's not anti-Ukraine or pro-Russian, it's kind of anti-Russia, where those of us who would be reflexively and deeply anti-Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they're kind of there to say, well, now let's not say that the Ukrainians are all good. And that has been sort of a devastating turn of events for the Republican Party.
You mentioned, it really is it's just so strange to see American Republicans saying nice things about Russia in this situation in terms of its invasion into Ukraine. It's just strange. It's just weird, frankly, given the history of the United States, given the history of the Republican Party. But what I want to know from you is, because you've got a bit of a finger on the pulse, obviously, is this leaders, including in the media, or is it the voters as well? Do the Republican Party voters think like that as well?
Yeah, so when people ask me this question, I tend to hold up my fingers and talk about the Republican triangle of doom, which is the toxic and symbiotic relationship between the voters, the elected officials, and the right-wing infotainment media. They all sort of work together to push further rightward. Take something like January 6th. Or the election being stolen. After those events, there's, a portion of the Republican Party that condemns them, that says, no, the election wasn't stolen, it was free and fair. No, January 6th was a terrible event. And then over time, that triangle kind of works on itself, where the media, the right-wing media says, no, that was patriots storming the U.S. Capitol, or I don't know, the election did look like it was stolen. And then that moves more voters, who then put pressure on elected officials. And once the elected officials come out and say, yeah, that was really just, a protest, that wasn't an insurrection, then that confirms it for another group of voters. And before you know it, you've got 70% of Republicans that believe the 2020 election was stolen. You've got an entire political apparatus that wants to just forget that January 6th happened and is like casting, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger out for being on the January 6th committee. And so they're all working symbiotically and reinforcing one another. It's not just one thing.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Trump, and I think you used the word kingmaker, or I'm using that word anyway, and you said supporting various candidates, which go against the grain of the majority of the GOP leadership. So they're all racing down to Mar-a-Lago, including the mainstreamers, and kissing the ring. Do you think, you mentioned J.D. Vance, there's also David Perdue in Georgia, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. Do you think these are candidates that will reflect Trump's success in the upcoming elections, or the opposite?
I think Trump has already succeeded. Look, there are friends of mine in the sort of anti-Trump Republican part of the party that have their magnifying glasses out, and they're looking at that Kemp-Perdue race, and they're saying, well, if Kemp holds on against Perdue, who's running as a Stop the Steal Trump-endorsed candidate, that's a reflection of Donald Trump's waning power. And I think that's sort of silly. I mean, first of all, Kemp is a relatively popular he's been elected 3 times. He's an incumbent governor. He should win. Like that, but if you look at the field, the entirety of the field, and you see how in Ohio, J.D. Vance, Josh Mandel, Gibbons, Jane Timken, they're all running to be the most MAGA candidate. Missouri, Arizona, across the country, there are no hey, let's move on from Trump candidates, almost none. And so when I say Trump's already won, I mean, he's moved the Overton window. He's moved the definition of what Republicans are. I mean, I saw Kay Ivey, she cut an ad talking about the election being stolen. This is like one of the most conventional establishment Republicans out there, and they've all bought in to this lie. And so when people sort of say race to race, how much does that reflect Donald Trump's power? I would look at the entirety of the field and say, this entire field has moved 10 steps Trumpward, and that is a reflection of his power over the party.
So do you think that's also reflected in the RNC decision to pull out of the, of the presidential debate system as we know it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is sort of an extension of Republicans trying to balkanize. Like when they sort of decide that they're being treated unfairly, they go off and they start their own media ecosystem. And I think that Donald Trump did something where he taught the party that it no longer had to commit to the political conventions that had always kind of, undergirded our process, right? He didn't release his tax returns. And nobody really held him accountable for it. There was no voter backlash. He was elected. And so I think the entire party has kind of taken an unfortunate lesson from that, which is, why don't we just withdraw from all of these institutions that, and create our own environment, create our own world, our own universe, where people don't challenge us on our facts. I mean, there really is something that I see as very dangerous and anti-democratic is the extent to which the Republican Party creates its own reality. And so I think this is another piece of that where, yeah, we don't want, the CNN anchors asking us tough questions. We'll have our own people. We'll have Alex Jones ask us questions from, InfoWars, and it'll be a much more comfortable environment.
Well, you just mentioned anti-democratic, and clearly doing this stuff systematically degrades America's democracy, just withdrawing from the actual process. And that is what Trump has spearheaded in the United States. We're talking now in the midst of an existential struggle for the world order that the U.S. helped lead. Democracy, freedom, and all the rest of it is playing out on the Ukrainian battlefield. CPAC, the conservative arm of republicanism, it's holding its latest convention soon in Hungary, the seat of an avowedly illiberal democracy, and the prime minister, re-elected for the fourth time, will be a keynote speaker. Describe that in the context of the world we're living in right now and the struggle for democracy to survive.
Well, it's so dangerous to have one of the two major political parties essentially abandon its commitment to democratic leadership in the world. I got to say, though, also on a personal level, it is like looking through a funhouse mirror I mean, when I came of age in sort of interest in politics and was looking at the Republican Party, there was a Reagan legacy of American leadership in the world, of us having a sense of responsibility, of us leading the democratic world. I mean, the Cold War is sort of what I was born into. I was born in 1980, you know, a Reagan baby. And so to look at this version of the Republican Party, not just abandon the field of democracy, but actively have parts of the party that align with the anti-democratic forces, not the least of which the current leader of the Republican Party and the former president, Donald Trump, who I don't know how you could describe him as anything other than pro-Putin. And the fact that there is no active backlash, either from the elected officials or the voters against Donald Trump, when he goes out and calls Putin smart, that is gobsmacking and so dangerous.
Right. Sarah Longwell, thank you so much indeed.